Hey YouTube, here Twig here, bringing you all an update to my Performapal Yu-Gi-Oh deck profile for February 2024. The last update, I tried to make a Performapal deck with the support from the Monstrous Revenge booster set, but newsflash, the cards were all very bad or really didn't have anything to do with the Performapal engine. So I tried to make them work for the deck profile at the time, but I'm still a big fan of just what the original support is meant to do for the deck, giving us access to a good amount of different extra deck summons and then being able to utilize all the many different Performapal monsters that we run in the deck, along with some Odd Eyes support to make for a pretty fun pendulum deck. So let's go ahead and get started with the deck profile. So we'll go ahead and start off with the main deck monsters. For our Performapal monsters, I'm running 3 copies of Performapal Skullcrobat Joker. When it's normal summon, you can add 1 Performapal monster or Odd Eyes monster from your deck to your hand, except for Skullcrobat Joker. Having that search power gives you access to the majority of the deck, so it's a great normal summon card to rely on, being able to complete your pendulum scales or even just grab some other cards. And then your restriction is just what you can pendulum summon if your Skullcrobat Joker is in the pendulum zone, which really can't limit you to anything that we run in the deck to begin with, just being a very good high 8 scale to run. And also 3 copies of Performapal Lady Ange. In the pendulum scale, once per turn, when an attack is declared involving your monster and an opponent's monster, you can discard 1 pendulum monster. That opponent's monster loses 1,000 attack till the end of this turn. And you can discard this card and 1 Performapal monster except for Lady Ange to draw 2 cards. If this card's in the graveyard and you control an Odd Eyes monster or Performapal Gentrude, you can place this card in your pendulum zone. Going its effect of Lady Ange once per turn, only once that turn. So just having this card and you control an Odd Eyes card or Performapal Gentrude, doesn't have to be a monster on the field, it can even just be a Gentrude in the pendulum scale to then complete your pendulum scale with this card being discarded for its draw power to hopefully draw into some of the other engine you need. We're also running 3 copies of Gentrude as well. If a Performapal Lady Ange is in your other pendulum zone, you control no monsters or only pendulum monsters, you can add 1 Odd Eyes card from your deck to your hand. So using a search off of Gentrude to grab Odd Eyes Pendulum Dragon is another added help, being a boss monster that can be used for primarily a good variety of extra deck monsters that we run also. And if this card is destroyed, you can place 1 Performapal Pendulum monster from your deck in your pendulum zone, except for Gentrude. If this card face up in the extra deck, you can discard 1 pendulum monster to add this card to your hand. Then you can return 1 Performapal Odd Eyes card from your pendulum zone to your hand. So if this card is destroyed off of cards like Pendulum Sorcerer, we then have an additional search to fix our pendulum scales. So Gentrude and Lady Ange just help with all the variety of setup, definitely making them needed 3-ofs in the deck. And also 3 copies of Pendulum Sorcerer, another searcher just for destroying our needed pendulum scales if we have to adjust any of the scales. As long as we can pendulum summon out a level 4 monster, Pendulum Sorcerer can destroy our scales and give us more proper scales to use for any of our plays. And then having in a boost for our Performapal monsters, if a Performapal monster is pendulum summoned, making all Performapals you currently control gain 1,000 attack even if this card leaves the field while being in the pendulum zone. And also 3 copies of Performapal Odd Eyes Seer. I like Seer for its level 6 option because we do run in the deck our Odd Eyes Synchron. So with the level matchup with Seer and Synchron, we can go into powerhouse synchros like our Blasting Draco Slayer, which is very useful for shuffling back cards with the use of our pendulum cards in the deck. But Odd Eyes Seer in the pendulum scale, you can target 1 Performapal or Odd Eyes card in your graveyard, add it to your hand, then destroy this card. You can use this effect once per turn. But with the discard cost we have of Lady Ange, we can use cards like Seer to add the cards back to our hand, and for its monster effect during your main phase, if you control this pendulum summon card, you can activate the following effects based on its battle position. If it's an attack position, you can banish this card and then target a Performapal or Odd Eyes in your graveyard and special summon it. Or in defense, take 1 Performapal or Odd Eyes monster from your deck and either add it face up in your extra deck or send it to the graveyard. More and more setup with Seer, making it a definite 3-of just so you have that play style that works pretty well in tandem with the setup that you can provide with cards like Gentrude and Lady Ange. And then the last of the 3-ofs for our Performapal monsters, 3 copies of Second Donkey. If this card is just normal or special summon, you can send a Performapal monster from your deck to the graveyard. Once again, another card that works well with the graveyard setup of cards like Seer. And if you have 2 pendulum scales, you can add to your hand instead. So just search power, Second Donkey can be the second runner-up to our normal summon of choice if Skullcrobat Joker isn't one of the other ones to go into, as long as you have pendulum scales already made thanks to this card. But now with cards like Odd Eyes Seer, even if you don't have the scale set up, you have a pendulum card that can at least get that resource from the graveyard back to your hand also. and also 2 copies of Performapal Celestial Magician. With this card, during your main phase, if it was normal or special summon this turn, you can apply the following effects for the rest of the turn based on the other monsters you currently control. Fusion, it can attack directly. Synchro, your opponent can activate monster effects. The Xyz, this card's attack become double its original attack. And Pendulum, during the end phase, add 1 Pendulum monster from your deck to your hand, having complete search power, but also a pretty high scale monster to utilize for when you have a Fusion, Synchro, Xyz monster, special summon from the extra deck destroyed, being able to special summon that destroyed monster back to the field. And then 2 copies of Odd Eyes Minotaurus for the additional attack boost this card provides, while also having a piercing battle damage effect from the Pendulum Scale as well. With our 1-ofs for the Performapal monsters, we do run a good variety of the 1-ofs just because we have a wide variety of search and setup with the other Performapals we run in the deck. But the 1 copy of Yugioh Golem, this is a fusion option when it's Pendulum Summon. Fusion summon 1 fusion monster from your extra deck using this card, and a dragon type monster you control as fusion material, which will be our Odd Eyes Pendulum Dragon. The 1 copy of Monkey Board for its search power, just being able to complete the scale by adding another Performapal if you have a Performapal in your other Pendulum Zone. Otherwise, it will become a scale 4. And then also 1 copy of Daggerman. Now, this warrior monster is in the deck, so we have a warrior to then use to go into cards like Brave Eyes Pendulum Dragon. And the 1 copy of Git Turtle for its draw power, with a Performapal activated in your other Pendulum Zone, being able to draw 1 card with this one. So a great card to add off of the destruction play that Pendulum Sorcerer can provide, because then we can activate this, another card, and then get more search out of it. For some of the other 1-ofs, 1 copy of Odd Eyes Unicorn for its attack life gaining play, as well as another high scale option. Trump Witch for the polymerization search, as well as being able to do so by grabbing another Performapal from the deck. And then the 1 Odd Eyes Synchron for the synchro plays this card can provide with our Pendulum Scales, and the same for Odd Eyes Dissolver with fusion plays from our Pendulum Scale. And then the only other Pendulum monster that I run in the deck is the 2 copies of Odd Eyes Pendulum Dragon. So we have the needed cards to go into some of the bigger boss monsters also, like Gatling Ghoul or our Brave Eyes Pendulum Dragon, using our fusion plays. But Odd Eyes Pendulum Dragon is a boss monster in its own for the double damage it can provide, and the end of the turn destruction in the Pendulum Scale to add a monster of choice with 1500 or less attack, being a Pendulum monster to do so. We have a pretty high monster count in the deck, but that is because they all work very well, because the more Pendulum Scales you have, the more the rest of your engine in your hand can be a monster lineup to Pendulum Summon out onto the field. So with our spell engine, we don't run any traps in the deck, because going second, it really doesn't help much. We want to go for a big hit play against our opponent. So for our spells, 3 copies of Performapal Popper Up. Send up to 3 cards from your hand to the graveyard to draw that many cards. Then you can special summon up to that many monsters from your hand with different names that are Performapal Magician, Pendulum, and or Odd Eyes monsters, with levels between the Pendulum Scales of 2 cards in your Pendulum Zone, almost counting as a second Pendulum Summon. And once again, just more graveyard setup to use with cards like Odd Eye Seer or our Lady Ange and Gentrude. 2 copies of Duelist Alliance to add Pendulum cards as well from our deck to our hands. We can add Odd Eyes or even our Pendulum Sorcerer off of this spell. And 2 copies of the last 1-ofs, being 1 copy of Extra Pendulum. It is another search off of Duelist Alliance, and giving you another Pendulum Summon to conduct during your turn from your extra deck. So if you go into any Link monsters using the already Pendulum Summon monsters you have onto the field, you can then use this card to conduct another Pendulum Summon to get more and more onto the field for your summons. 1 Pendulum Fusion using our Pendulum monsters as well, using 2 cards in your Pendulum Zone to perform that Pendulum Fusion, and the 1 Fusion Substitute as more of a drawback option from the graveyard as well, and still counting as polymerization, so you can add it off of cards like Trump Witch. And that is it for the main deck. We'll now move on to the extra deck. For the Performapal monsters, the 1 copy of Performapal Gatling Ghoul, having a destruction play, and then also additional burn damage to your opponent, just needing a Performapal monster and 1 level 5 or higher dark monster, which can either be Odd Eyes or even our Odd Eyes Seer to use for this fusion play, or even cards like our Odd Eyes Dissolver, being a dark level 8 monster to use for the fusion play also. The 2 copies of Odd Eyes Metal Claw, needing an Odd Eyes monster, and a Performapal monster, so we have in the form of our Performapal Odd Eyes monsters if need be. And if this card is summoned with polymerization, it's unaffected by other card effects as well, and it can attack all monsters. And when this card declares an attack, all monsters you currently control gain 300 attack until the end of the battle phase, being a boost for your other Performapals if you have cards like Pendulum Sorcerer in your Pendulum Scale, an additional boost on top, hitting this card for a 4300 potential attack against your opponent. And then lastly, the 1 Brave Eyes Pendulum Dragon and the 1 Peticiel Coverture, This could also be Starving Venom if you wish for this spot. For the fusion plays, with our Xyz monsters being 1 Bagooska, 1 Dark Rebellion, and 1 Magister Paladin, just because I find rank 4s to be some of the easier ones to summon out with this deck, with our only synchro monster being the Ignister Prominence. For its synchro play, like I said, one of my favorites is just the Odd Eye Synchron, with Seer using the summon of Synchron on the field, and then the Seer in the extra deck to then summon out and use for the synchro play of this boss monster onto the field, with our Link monsters being the 1 copy of Beyond the Pendulum and the 1 Exceed the Pendulum for the use of easy pendulum scales. Beyond the Pendulum giving us a search for that pendulum monster, also giving us easy arrows to use the extra deck with both of these. And also the 1 Barricade Board Blocker, the 1 SP Little Knight, the 1 Metaltron, and the 1 Apollosa for the rest of the Link monsters to be able to go into. And as for some of the go-to plays, one of the funnest things about the Performapal deck is just the fact that depending on the cards in your hand, that will determine your play you want to go for. There's a wide variety of what you can do, but just for the start-off play, if you have cards like your Skull Acrobat Joker, and then let's just say 1 additional Performapal, it really all comes down to what you have in your hand for that summon, because then you have the search you can use with Skull Acrobat Joker to grab cards like Monkey Board, activating Monkey Board. Monkey Board can then complete your pendulum scale with that 1 additional scale, high scale, in the other one as well. So then with that added play, this will all come down to the search. If you have cards like Pendulum Sorcerer in your hand already, then you'll want to at least complete your high scale to be able to summon out. So you can add cards like Odd Eyes Unicorn and then set up the pendulum scale with those 2 cards. Then you can pendulum summon out. If you only had the 1 in your hand, you can summon out your Pendulum Sorcerer. This will activate destroying these 2 cards, placing them in your extra deck. And then from there, being able to search out 2 additional Performapal monsters. So with this play, you can add either your Lady Ange and your Gentrude, because then you'll have the search for both of these cards, being able to add an Odd Eyes card off of Gentrude if Lady Ange is in the other one, and then also the extra additional attack power thanks to Lady Ange for your other monsters as well. So that's 2 additional search options there. You could also go for the Git Turtle and another Performapal monster. You can have either that or the search for cards like your Odd Eyes Dissolver, because then you can go for the fusion play. But since you already set up the Monkey Board in your extra deck as well to use for a potential second Pendulum summon, if you have cards like your extra Pendulum in your hand or a way to search it out, you can go for scales to at least complete your setup. So you can go for Celestial Magician and 1 additional low-key scale monster like your Yugioh Golem. For this setup on the field, you can then use the Skull Acrobat Joker and the Pendulum Sorcerer for a Link 2 play to add and activate your Beyond the Pendulum, which this card will then be able to search out 1 additional Pendulum monster as well to your hand. And with that monster, you can add cards like your Odd Eyes to give you access to other extra deck plays also. Then all you need, and remember you're locked into card effects for the Beyond the Pendulum, so if you have the search or means to use your Duelist Alliance to add cards like Extra Pendulum, do so beforehand so you can grab this card conducting your Extra Pendulum summon, because then you have the 2 available arrows for you to then use to Pendulum summon back onto the field cards from your extra deck like your Skull Acrobat Joker and the Pendulum Sorcerer, the Odd Eyes from your hand, and then make use of some of the other cards on your field as well, having the additional summon and protection for your Xyz monsters. So if you go into an Xyz monster with your Celestial Magician on the field as just extra protection, having cards like Magister Paladin then do just be able to conduct an additional search for any Pendulum monsters you may need for the plays to come. And then being able to use cards like Odd Eyes, Beyond the Pendulum to go into higher link scales, or even some bigger boss monsters as well. But that is it for the deck profile. I hope you all enjoyed. Like I said, I wanted to update it because the support we got from Monsters Revenge was a little bit lackluster, and wanted to go for more of a playstyle with some of the best Performapals we have to offer for the deck. And as always, until next time, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, and Kira Twig out.